All right, in the latest edition of What's Up in the Suez, I am again joined by John Conrad, the CEO of gCaptain. As a matter of fact, gCaptain has helped arrange us for today's episode, so a little sponsorship here on my little YouTube channel. We're going to be joined here by Nick Sloane in a second. I am Sal Mercogliano. I'm an associate professor of history at Campbell University, a former merchant mariner, and a contributor to the events that seems to be going on in the Suez right now. So, Nick, I was wondering if you can go ahead and introduce yourself for those of us who don't know you.
Yeah, okay. My name's Nick Sloane. I'm a salvage master. I work for Resolve Marine Group, based in Cape Town, but the headquarters of Resolve is obviously in Florida, near Fort Lauderdale. And we've been in Cape Town here for 6 years for the Resolve Group. I started off in the South African Merchant Shipping Company in 1980, and my first salvage operation was 1983. And it took me another year to transfer full-time into the salvage division. So it's about 36, 37 years that I've been in salvage and having fun around the world.
Nick, I was warned not to fanboy over you greatly because of your background and your experience and everything. But I'm a tenured professor and I can do whatever I want, so I don't care.
Well, I just want to say,
John doesn't pay me.
We don't typically do interviews, and we get a lot of feedback from the PR community and our advertisers. Why don't you interview this CEO or that CEO or this acronym or this admiral? And I'm a big fan of Talib, the author. He wrote the book Skin in the Game. I want people who have been on the deck of the ship and are risking something. I don't have near the experience Nick has, but working offshore construction, offshore oil rigs, unless there are real consequences and you have real skin on the game, we don't when we're investigating something like the Suez Canal, we don't talk to the CEO of some shipping company or PR firm. We talk to the guys we try to talk to the guys who are at the canal, the pilots, the salvage guys. But Nick's the exception, a leader of a company who still gets on the deck of the ship. So we're so excited to have you, Nick.
And to let everybody know, Nick, too, because we're going to have some people watching this who are not well-versed in the maritime field. They're learning about this and everything. Probably the most famous one, and I know it's probably not your favorite wreck to talk about, is the Costa Concordia and the wreck of that vessel off the coast of Italy at the time. And we're not going to delve in that, but it gives you some context of Nick's bona fides and what he's done. Nick, I want to get your perspective on the events unfolding in the Suez, obviously, and the Ever Given. What's your take on the situation, and what do you think of what's happening right now with regard to the salvage operation?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, Sal. So basically, you've got one of the largest ships that's afloat, literally 400 meters long. So that's 4 football fields and 60 meters wide, 59 meters wide. So the same width as a football field. So you had a draft of about 15 and a half meters, which is, I guess for you guys, is about 45 to 50 feet, and almost 300,000 tons of displacement. So when she took that shed to starboard off to the right, literally she was in a deep water canal that's been dredged and was only opened in 2015 to accommodate these mega ships. And it's one of the narrowest part of the Suez Canal, so it's not even 400 meters in width. And she took a sheer off, skidded off to starboard, and she literally plowed through the shallow side of the canal, moving maybe 20, 30, 40,000 tons of sand that's been pushed around her bow. And obviously with the momentum, she mostly had about 4 to 5 million meters of momentum. The stern just kept on swinging, and then she ended up grounding on the other side. So you've got the bow and the stern well aground, and the belly of the ship is obviously still in the deep water canal and not supported. So it's literally the worst part of the canal that something could happen. And it just happened to happen with the biggest ship that's ever gone through there.
And I think, you make that point. I've made it a few times. You're talking about the fact that her bow is implanted in Asia, her stern's hanging on Africa, and she's kind of dangling over the canal. And I can't tell you the number of people who've sent me notes about how to get this vessel off and ideas about this, and it's great.
We'd be happy to share them with you, Nick. I
Yeah.
don't know how useful they are, but some of them are quite humorous.
They are quite humorous, and obviously something of this scale and scope. I know a lot of salvage operations. When you did Costa Concordia, you were, it wasn't in the middle of a seaway. It wasn't in blocking traffic. So you've got two issues, I think, going on here, and I really want to get your perspective on you as a salver, what goes on here. So you've got a time constraint here. You obviously would have the Egyptian authorities, the Suez Canal Authority, screaming bloody murder to get the ship out of the way. Whereas you as a salver, what's your concerns going into this? Your concern, I imagine, is not time. What's your big concern?
Yeah, obviously time's against you. There's always pressure, and the fact that she's suspended and sagging, so the middle of the ship is not supported exactly like that. That these ships are big, and they're designed to flex in the ocean seaway, but they're not designed to sit like that for weeks on end, and especially fully laden without support. So for the Salvors, it's literally find out how many thousand tons of sand and mud and rock is around the bow and the stern, and start dredging. There's maybe 20,000 tons of liquids on board, ballast and fuel. Once they've done the structural assessment, they can see where they can deballast, and if they can actually get some of the fuel off. But there's only 4 or 5 ports in the whole of Europe that this ship can go alongside that has cranes big enough to actually reach the cargo. So in the middle of the Suez Canal, taking a cargo off is going to be the last resort. So dredging and recreate the water around her, get rid of those thousands and thousands of tons of sand that's been pushed up. I would say maybe 100,000 tons of ground reaction that she has, which she's well aground. So for the horse, you missed the spring tide tomorrow and Monday. I don't think they should worry about that. It's more do a proper assessment. They're mostly mapping the seabed to see what is the new situation of the seabed. Pass it on to the dredging and focus where you want the dredgers to start dredging, and then look at the structural integrity of the ship, how sound and how safe she is, and then decide where you can deballast and maybe get some fuel off. But yeah, with this, solidly aground like that and dredging, I think that's one of the best options they've got.
Very interesting. It's interesting about the weights. We had an article by Captain George Livingston, the pilot in San Francisco Bay, talking about these mega ships. And he said 10 years ago, you had these 10,000 TEU ships, and they were on average 300 meters long. Now these new mega 20,000 are 400 meters long. So they've increased in size by 25%. And they've doubled in capacity. But what he says people don't realize is the weight hasn't doubled or tripled. They've gone from an average of 55,000 deadweight tons, he says, to almost 200,000 deadweight tons, a 4-fold weight. So what is the weight of this ship, both in, as you said, the sagging and the structural integrity, but also what other challenges does that immense weight provide?
Yeah, I think the BSM drawing that you have right here that shows exactly the situation is that she's actually going to start sagging, and if you get these rulers that you have, plastic rulers in class, and you used to flex them and keep on flexing until it snapped. Well, that's the same as a ship. The ship can flex in a seaway, but it's designed for that seaway and the triacoidal wave that passes down the length of a ship. To be suspended like this is most probably the worst condition for a ship, and especially the fact that you can't do anything with the major cargo components. So you have to change some ballast and maybe some fuel, but you're not going to change the situation apart from getting rid of the ground reaction at the bow and the stern. And of course, at the same time, they'll be doing a dive assessment to see how badly the rudder or propellers are damaged. I don't think they'll worry too much about the bow section. It's more whether that they can use the engines at all when they do try and refloat. But I'd imagine they won't rely on anything from the ship apart from trying to keep the cargo on board and recreate that water around it and, give us some buoyancy.
Yeah, we haven't heard much talk about the stern section, but that was my issue too. Is if the propeller's encumbered, if the rudder's been damaged. I mean, she had to swing very hard when she stopped as fast as she did. I mean, doing about 13 knots in the canal and swinging around. That was my issue. Rather, is the overall assessment of the damage on it. It seems as if the Egyptians immediately kind of wanted to just dredge and just start digging away before they really got a proper assessment. And I would imagine that, one of the things that when I talk about people, and I've studied a lot of salvage operations in history and through my studies of maritime history, and one of the things I always notice about salvage operators is slow is best. Nothing moves unless you plan to move it. And I think the worst thing that could possibly happen is this vessel move on its own, without any sort of control. And as you mentioned, as the
Same
tide,
for us too, Sal. The saying is, speed's like salt, easy to put on, hard to take off.
right. And so it seems to me, especially with this flexing of the vessel and as the tide goes, you get about a 1.5-2 meter range of tide in here. So this vessel is going to be flexing a bit. You're right about the width of this vessel, 60 meters, almost 200 feet. I don't know how you get containers off. Again, a crane, even if you get a crane on the port side, you got to get a crane on the starboard side. And I don't know how you get the center containers off. So let's just talk about a standard salvage. I mean, your assessment, what would you usually do going into a salvage operation? What's the normal procedure for you going into a salvage so that we would expect to be going on at this time right now during this event?
So for somewhere like this, the only good thing is that she's not exposed to an ocean seaway, with swells and narrow reef.
No.
So hopefully she's all the forces and factors are going to be right around you and you can see them. They'll have some strong wind and maybe a dust storm or two in the next couple of weeks. I believe they had about 25 knots with a lot of dust on the day that the incident happened. And but now that she's aground, the main thing is to make sure that you get the oil away from any danger area. So if there's oil in the midship tanks, you'll get it either off the ship or somewhere to the extremities. So if she does crack later on, at least you're not going to have a pollution problem. Maybe look at taking some of the non-essential crew off, but on these big ships, John, you mentioned that they're 400% heavier than ships of 10 years ago, but the crews are actually half. So we've had some situations where you've had to actually ask the crew to get off to give you space for the salvage team. I don't think that's a problem here. They don't have.
And people think that there's a cockpit like on an aviation where you can do everything with remote valves and such. It's not the case. The electronics and the technology has not improved in 20 years. So you still have to send someone down often to turn valves, right?
Yeah, exactly. And especially with a split engine room accommodation up forward, it's about 6 minutes just to get from the accommodation to the engine room. So, when you think it's just reach over and change something, it's you sit there, you've got the ballast control room might be up by the cargo office, but when you want to pump fuels and do some major transfer of the liquids, you want to plan it, and I think you don't want to rush into it. So they want to make sure they've mapped the seabed and see the new profile, work out the ground reaction, exactly how much force. I think from just looking at that bow photograph, I would imagine that she's maybe 4 to 5 meters out of draft overall. So maybe 120,000 tons of ground reaction. But that was just from a quick sum thick. So the naval architects will be trying to recreate the model of the ship, superimpose that on the seabed, look at the ground reaction and where the major points are, and then work out the stresses and the longitudinal and shear forces to see how safe the ship is. And of course, she's not safe, so you got to look at moving fuel away from the areas that might be high risk.
Nick,
One thing I've
oh, go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
One thing that I've, as a captain, one of the first things we always talk about on the ship, when I get on a new ship was, this ship has good steel. That ship doesn't have good steel, or, this area flexes, or the steel soft in this area of the ship. Obviously there's different quality steel. And when I think the public, especially in America, when they think of the steel of the ship, they think of the aircraft carrier museum or the destroyer museum that's nearby. And each of these museums has a cutout of the steel hull and sees these thick 2-inch steel. And I think that's what's in the mind of most of the public. Can you talk a little bit about what steel is actually on the ship and the importance of the thickness and quality of the steel?
Yeah, so I think since computer technology is advanced, they can actually minimize the strength of the steel by having it profiled. So underwater plasma cutting, instead of having, let's say, a thumb suck of, tying in a transverse and vertical girder, they actually have a profile that actually cuts it out. And that means you can save weight. So they want to save weight, maximize the cargo capacity of the volume of the ship. So they have some very strong box sections, and then mainly the strength will be longitudinally. But on the bottom, you've got quite a deep double bottom on her, and that's about over 3 meters deep. So that's the strength of the ship, and she will be under a lot of stress with the sort of flexing that sagging that she's been exposed to. So time is against it. It should be okay. It's a new ship, it's only a couple of years old, and hopefully the quality of the steel doesn't come into it. I know when you have a 10-year-old plus bulk carrier, that's where you want to know where it was built and the quality of the steel. But hopefully the quality of the steel won't be a problem here, but they do minimize the scantlings, or the size of the steel, by using these huge computer modeling that they can do, and then do profiling, underwater plasma cutting of the actual material, minimize the weight of the ship, the actual life.
They're not built like they used to be, literally.
Well,
Yeah.
And I think we see an example of that with the Golden Ray in Brunswick, Georgia, that rolled on her side, and they've had to scrap her in place. That was a vessel only 2 years old, and even though she capsized, years ago, you would have been able to roll her back up and maybe be able to salvage her, but because of it, as you said, the steel quality, it becomes an issue. Nick, I really interested in another aspect here. This is a very unique, I think, jurisdictional issue. I'm wondering, your experience. What is it like when you're dealing with are the salvagers usually employed by the owner of the vessel, the operating company, and then what is that interaction like with someone like Egypt and the Suez Canal Authority, who have already begun salvage operations prior to the arrival of the salvage team?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of refloats of container ships in the Suez Canal, 3 over the last 12 years. So it's not that often, but it does happen. So the first 24 to 48 hours, the Suez Canal Authority are very strong. They take full control, and they don't like anyone else to tell them what to do. But as soon as the situation becomes apparent that 6 tugs or 8 tugs is not going to do it, and you have to look at either deballasting, transferring fuel, and dredging, then that's when the owners have brought in the Salvage. And I'm quite sure the liability and hull underwriters will be very actively involved in this one. So you've got A-grade salvage teams involved here, Nippon and Smith. So they've done this type of thing before. No one's done a ship this size in this situation. So every situation is dynamic and different. But the Suez Canal authorities will start backing off and give them some space. But you'll have to present the plan and then highlight the risks and how you're going to try and mitigate those risks. And of course, the Suez Canal is not only embarrassed by having it blocked, and it's a vital seaway, global shipping lane, but they're losing revenue every day. So there'll be political pressure on the Suez Canal Authority, and that pressure will come down on the Salvage. They'll get pressure from the ship owner as well to say, how quickly can you get this out? And why are you not doing anything right now? And obviously at this stage, they're putting all their modeling together, looking at the seabed profile, looking at the dredging capacity, and working out the salvage plan that they have to present. I would imagine they'll be presenting it either this evening, if they haven't already, or certainly by tomorrow. But the dredgers are there busy. I mean, that's a no-brainer. You've got dredges. It's soft, relatively soft sand. Where the bow actually entered the side of the canal, they have some they say rock protection. So that will be a bit more difficult, and there'll be more damage due to that on the bulbous bow. Hopefully the stern didn't impact the actual rock barrier, and it's more sand on the stern. But I definitely think that you'll find the rudders are damaged, and maybe even the propellers. So yeah, the salvors will be under pressure. But as John said, you can't give the answer that they want to hear if it's not what you want to present. So you've got to be patient and say, listen, unless you have a magic wand, this is the reality, this is the ground reaction, and these are the solutions. And I think, if she was going southbound, a lot of those containers on the top would be empty. And, a helicopter can pick up empty containers. But going from Asia to Europe northbound, there's no empty containers. Those are full. And I don't think helicopters can aid much. I mean, where you're going to put the cargo, just on the desert. So keep the cargo on board and recreate the water around it. That's the sort of focus.
Well, that's an interesting point, because Joe Biden came out yesterday and Egypt asked the U.S. for help. And Joe Biden says, the United States Navy has equipment and capabilities that no one else in the world is, and we're looking at ways to help. Sal and I question that fact. We did at one point have the best salvage equipment in the world. There's a famous book about the salvage efforts in Djibouti in World War II. But now we just had a major fire and current salvage operations on the Bonhomme Richard in San Diego. And San Diego, our most important harbor, with $9 billion destroyers and many billion-dollar aircraft carrier, they don't have one single fireboat or ocean salvage tug in our most important port. And as you saw from the pictures, they were trying to put it out with little police boat things. So do you think the U.S. can help here? And what more importantly, what's the intersect now? When the Navy has incidents like the Fitzgerald and the McCain, they often rely on commercial help for that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think if this was, deep water, then the U.S. Navy has some great assets that you can use. I've worked with SupSolve on a few occasions in the past, and okay, it's quite a while back now, so it's 15 years, 16 years ago. But
we don't talk about age, Nick, and how old we are and things like that. It's experience. That's the key there. So you're good.
So in a situation like this, unless you're going to recreate a logistical base right on the banks of the Suez, and you needed bulldozing and military, commitment to running an operation to do it as quickly as possible, I don't think that's going to help. It's literally dredging and common sense. Build the model, see what you can do with the liquids, pump off the ballast that you can. Look at the stability, make sure that, when she does start floating, she's not compromised. So it's nice to have the military to say they'll support you on this one. But I would say that, the dredging assets, and then when it comes to the tugs, all those assets should be in place. Maybe a couple more dredges would speed it up.
Nick, I was wondering if you could talk about what kind of, every salvage operation is unique. Like you said, there's no, there's a textbook on salvage, but every time you go into a different operation, it's different. They're all unique, and you have to literally use that experience that you've accumulated and the crews have accumulated over the years to really assess this. This is, again, it's so unusual. That's why it's so difficult when I talk to people about this. Is everything's unique? I get the question all the time, has this ever happened before? It's like, well, no, this never happened before. Most salvages have never happened before. That's what makes them very unique. And you need to come up with a new set of standards and rules for a situation in almost any standard large vessel stranding like this, what are some assets, what are some things that you would want, moving into the area? What are some things that are essential for you to perform this operation? Again, we got a lot of people who may know nothing about this. So, what are some of those things that are absolutely essential? Do you have, we're talking about tugs, dredges, what type of things do you get on the way here for this?
Yeah, so for this particular situation, dredging, and more dredging, and then big tug capacity for when you want to actually maneuver it and control that maneuver. Um, you're going to need some small bunker barges, maybe mini tankers, because she's got a lot of fuel oil on board. So you want to try and get rid of that where you can as quickly as possible. Maybe even replace that load with some ballast water just to get the fuel off. But that would depend on the structural assessment that the naval architect and the salvage master, decide on which way to go. Um, if she was a tanker, then you want dredging, you want tugs, but also being a tanker, then you have another tanker, obviously a bit smaller, that you can now pump the liquids off. And tankers are actually quite nice because you can pump the cargo off. A container ship, you can't, and a bulk carrier, you can't. So container ships are slightly better than bulk carriers because bulk carriers have normally a high density cargo. And if you have any structural failure, it happens pretty quickly. But for this one, I think, people just have to say it's not going to be 24 hours or 48 hours. It might be a week or more. And if that seabed profile, that drawing that you had is any different from reality, the ship itself is at risk at the moment of being damaged just by the actual weight that you're talking about there.
And that's the thing about doing a salvage operation too. It's dynamic. The situation you're in right now may not be the situation, an hour from now, 2 hours from now. You can pump out and dredge all the time, and then it's going to fill in. It's again, it's water and dirt. You got to keep abreast of it and stay on it. And I think that's the other thing is you're continually reassessing. And it's not like you make the plan. Okay, this is the plan. We're going to do this, and off you go for 2 weeks, because you got to continually reassess during the situation, right?
Yeah, you've got to monitor it, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've already started placing stress monitoring alongside the hull. So on a ship this size, you mostly have 6 either side, and these are linked to the computer, and you can see a trend. So they pick up minuscule movements, and if you see a trend and you have the graph, you can actually see what's happening. So you need to monitor that carefully because what you want to do and what you want to achieve, hopefully the graph will be showing you that you're achieving that before you can actually see it with the naked eye. So you need to monitor it continuously. And if it's going the wrong way, you need to stop immediately and find out why it's getting worse and better.
And what about they're ordering high capacity pumps because they had flooding in a void space in the bow thruster room? Is that just local because they're pushed up against the sand, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So it's always nice, on the salvage package, we have portable pumps that are normally hydraulic driven for this type of operation. So you got the pumps themselves you can manhandle with 1 or 2 guys, 200-300 tons an hour, and you can get them through the lightning holes and put them in place, and then with the hydraulic power packs on deck, run the hydraulic hoses to it. You don't have the problem with gases in these void spaces. So they'll have a chemist there monitoring, because the whole bow section and above deck is where the dangerous cargo lies. So they'll be having a chemist putting some zone monitors around all of that cargo just to make sure, because the temperatures in the daytime get quite high, and you don't want to have gases leaking out that actually come down and into the void space where the salvors are trying to pump it out. I think they'll pump it out just to see how bad the crack is. It might have been a ruptured pipe, ballast pipe. As we say, she had a couple of million tons of grounding momentum. She'll be flexing, and all the pipe work in that area would have been subjected to sort of huge flexing forces. So hopefully it was just the pipe that has come adrift, but there's rocks on that barrier. and maybe some of that's entered the bulbous bow or the void space around the bulbous bow.
And what happens? What's the worst case scenario here? Do you think if things don't go right?
Well, I wouldn't be too worried about the bow. I'd be more worried about the dangerous cargo on the fore part of the ship, to make sure that the chemist is monitoring that, and that while you're working with everything else, something doesn't start going wrong that's actually going to become quite toxic or dangerous or explosive up there. So I would say the midship section, you've got to try and minimize the forces there internally, transfer ballast, transfer fuel, or lighten the fuel, and focus on getting that bow.
Because if cracks start to develop there, does that make the salvage that much more difficult?
Yeah. The ship can only take so much, so you can have a few cracks and you can contain it with pumps and things, and seal off compartments and pressurize it with air. But if it goes all the way around and you start seeing dimples in the side shell, that's a really bad sign that the stresses are actually too much for the ship, and it's not a good situation where she is right now.
Nick, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about salvage industry for a second. Again, get some background and everything. Where do your personnel come from? Where do you get? Is there a school to go to become a salvage expert? And where do they come from in the background behind them?
Yeah, we have a lot of young officers here interested. How do they get to where you are in 20 years?
Yeah, well, I must admit it is a fascinating career. It's very selfish because you get the call at normally 2 o'clock in the morning to be at the airport by 4, and you're not sure exactly where you're going, what the situation is, or when you're coming back. So if you have a regular, tour of duty, it's far better for the family. But when you get into the salvage side, then it's something that you're doing because you love it, and I don't think your wife and kids will love it after a few years. It's like, are you going to spend some time at home, or the kids coming through school? You've got to try.
Well, that's why I started gCaptain. My wife every day. When are you coming home? When are you getting off the ship? When are you getting off? And then I got off, and it's been 10 years, and now every day she asks me, when are you going back? Because she'll probably ask me, did you ask Nick for a job? Because I wouldn't mind you leaving.
Mine said the same thing about getting off the ship and everything. Are most of the salvors are they mariners? Are they engineers? What's their kind of background? Or is it just a diverse group? And where do they come from? Are they from around the world? Do you get them, are they all from England, from the United States?
No, so we have, and I'll say, we are one of the world's bigger salvage companies with a very big diversified footprint. So we have the UK, we've got Holland, Gibraltar. So you've got the Poms, the Dutch, and the whatever the Gibraltars call themselves these days.
Not Spanish, India. That's for sure.
Yeah, half and half. India, Singapore, and Resolve is the only non-Chinese oil spill responder in China. It's just over 10 years that they've had that, and so that gives you a footprint into China. Then we got South Africa. We just opened up in South America, and I think 23 bases around America in the various captain of the port zones, and obviously Alaska is very important to Resolve. So we've got Dutch Harbor and Anchorage. So our background would be naval architect engineers, marine engineers. So you got the modeling and the actual physical mechanical engineering, mariners for understanding ship handling and maneuvering, and divers, chemists, and then everyone in between. So nowadays, of course, we're using drones, ROVs. So you either get a diver that wants to become an ROV operator, or you get someone that was a dive tech that went into ROV and drones. So it's actually quite a broad spectrum. Marine chemists are very important, of course, as you can imagine, with the cocktails of chemicals and drugs and products on a ship like this. So the core team would be salvage master can be the engineer, naval arc, mariner, divers if they're there, and some of the divers have they're diesel mechanics or technicians in their own right. And so you have a whole lot of different craftsmen who just come together, and you say, listen, guys, this is it. We need a full underwater inspection, and they know what to do. We do find when we bring the divers in from oil and gas that they stand there waiting for the procedures to be given. And you say, listen, you have to go in and do the inspection, and then we can draft the procedure for that, do the risk assessment. But we going on where the crew have actually lost control of the situation. So we have to be prepared to be more flexible in approaching a risk. But then all of our guys, they've done their firefightings, their refreshers every couple of years. So you got these adrenaline junkies in the team, and you need to calm them down. But there's nothing better than having a nice team, where when
So
you get
I grew up in the Bronx, and my dad was heavy rescue. So there was only one fire truck, Rescue 3.
Yeah.
In the whole borough, and the whole Bronx was burning. He was in the Vietnam War, and then he said this was worse. But they were the one truck that the other trucks called when they couldn't solve a problem. So they did hazmat and building collapses, and he loved it. But when he got into administration, when he was promoted to captain and he had to recruit these guys, he said it was really difficult because you need amazing book smarts for all the chemical stuff and the hazmat and the structural, but you also need real street smarts and obviously bravery. And he says finding those three attributes was his biggest challenge, that recruitment. So can you talk about, a little how do you find a guy who's both book smart and street smart and brave enough to actually get into the double bottom as the hull's starting to crack?
And not just guys, but I'm sure there's women doing
Women
this
too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it comes a lot to trust, John, and the very first job that they're on, there won't be that bond and trust that's built up. So you need a couple of jobs with the teams where when you tell them what the risks are in a situation like this, you want to get the divers to do a full assessment, and you have to say, but be careful of this. So the dive supervisor, he needs to be able to calm their nerves, because when you're under a ship like this, the noises underwater of steel under stress and cargo moving, it's quite airy. And, some people just don't like that type of noise when you're underwater. They prefer looking at beautiful fish on a reef. So you need those type of divers.
I've been in the bottom of a strong ship in moderate to heavy waves and got a bit eerie at points.
Yeah, definitely. The noises. So some of the team here in South Africa, we had a ship on fire off Durban 15 years ago, and the local fire chief came and we worked together. And at the end, he said he was amazed. He didn't know about the salvage industry. So he actually became a commercial diver and joined us, and he had all the hazmat and firefighting training. So we've got a couple of guys from that background. But it's really good if you have a diver plus a diesel mech, or a diver plus an electrician type of trade to get in there. And naval architecture, engineering, and mariners, the engine, deck, bosuns, you bring them all together. And then on a job-by-job basis, you bring in the experts, like a pure chemist, hazmat leader, to manage something like this.
Nick, I'm a former mariner. I'm a volunteer firefighter for 20 years, but I can't help but notice you didn't state that you need a historian to be with the teams to document this and be able to write about it, because I think
here we go again. This is
just absolutely.
You're gonna get a history lesson on Winston Churchill here.
Absolutely fascinating. No, we're pushing up time, so I want to end with two questions with you, Nick, if you don't mind. Number one, I want to get your just a perspective from you. What's your most memorable salvage operation or event in salvage? Obviously you don't have to go into a lot of detail, but I know that's probably not the ones we think of. There's usually always an event that kind of stands out for a lot of people, and it's usually not the one that they're most known for at times. And then finally, your assessment, what do you see going forward here with the Evergreen ship in the Canal right now, and what's your prospect on that? So
okay, yeah, so my most memorable salvage, Well, maybe one of the first ones, of course, because that was what got me highly excited. It was a Spanish tanker off South Africa that was on fire, the Castillo de Belver, and I was actually on leave, and I came into the office to ask, when was my next assignment, and they said they're looking for more hands to help on the ship on fire, and I said, how are we going to get there? And they said, well, the helicopters will be leaving shortly, and that was it. I love helicopters, and I thought going out to a burning ship on a helicopter would be great. But when we got out there, the fire had actually completely taken hold of the tanker, and it was burning across the midship section, the whole manifold, and she actually broke, and the stern section went up in a fireball and sunk, the oil. So about 270,000 tons of oil was lost in that incident. Fortunately, the wind was blowing offshore away from the Cape. The bow section had about 70,000 tons of oil, and the bow came up, and you just saw sort of from number one tank into the forecastle, and we said, well, now what we're going to do? And of course, being the 80s, there was no hot tapping, and it was so we towed it outside of the environment, the 200 nautical mile economic zone, put some shape charges on it with choppers and divers, and blew up the buoyancy and said, there she goes. And so that was really interesting. Nowadays, of course, firefighting, you've got different type of chemicals you can add to the firefighting water, but certainly if you had 70,000 tons in the bow section, you could actually use the hot taps and recover all of that. I've had a couple of really interesting jobs down in Chile, Patagonia, Pakistan, Papua New Guinea. So each one of those was, completely crazy, because Patagonia is so remote, isolated, and in Pakistan, Karachi, there was a tanker called the Tasman Spirit that broke in 2003, and there you actually see that a city that in 1948 or 1949 had about 2 million people, and now has 20 million people, and the infrastructure and roads hasn't allowed it to progress efficiently. So we had a bit of political pressure there. There's oil all over the beaches and into the city. So that one it started off as more of a semi-panic attack that, you're never going to leave this place. But 7 months later, when we finished, we were actually on quite good terms with the one of the judges in the court, one of the admirals and the generals. So it takes that time where you just have to be transparent and say, listen, these are the facts. We're not going to try and hide anything. We're not going to try and tell you what you want to hear. This is the reality of the situation, and this is what we're going to do. And you have to build that trust up wherever you are. And I'm sure that's exactly what's happening now on the Evergreen. Is they did an assessment, and they're going to go back to the authorities and say, here's our plan. And it's not going to be tomorrow. The authorities want it out tomorrow. The rest of the shipping community wants it out tomorrow, but they've got to do it safely. And it's a massive, massive ship.
John, you got any last question for Nick?
No, thank you so much, Nick. Like I said in the beginning, we really, we don't do many interviews, but we really appreciate the fact that you have skin in the game and been on these ships and really understand, been there, done that, and continue to do it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And we all love reading, gCaptain out here. So keep up the good work.
And Sal and I will be sending you our resumes. I'm like you. There's a helicopter in my backyard, and to go a tank or fire or a ship in the heavy seas, I'm always, let's go, let's do it. But when I get out there, I regret it. I say, never again.
Nick, again, I'm a diver, I'm a firefighter, a former mariner, and a writer. So we can make it. We can put this in. We can make the deals and get even better press out there and make history and let everybody know about this, because I think one of the biggest issues in the maritime industry is it's a hidden industry. A lot of people don't know anything about it. And one of the things I've been trying to do is get out there and let people know about it. And I think something like this really captures the imagination in many ways. So I want to thank you too, Nick, for taking the time. taking a huge amount of time out of your day to talk to us all the way from South Africa. We appreciate it, and we hope to kind of touch base with you again maybe later on and see, once this operation is done, maybe do an afterwards and take a look at it and see what exactly happened and how it transpired. So I appreciate it, Nick. Any last comments?
Yeah, perfect. I'd like to catch up with you guys when the world gets back to normality, and we catch up over beer in Fort Lauderdale. In fact, right next door to one of Resolve's big bases is a little microbrewery called Lauder Ale, and it would be an ideal location to have a wash up.
I
Sounds like a deal.
I got a brother in Fort Lauderdale and everything like that, and I'll just charge John for the flight, so we're good and everything like that. So that works good.
There
So
we go.
I think we're good. All right, I'm Sal Mercagliano. I want to thank again Nick Sloane for joining us. On behalf of gCaptain and John Conrad, we appreciate you watching this video. And again, stay tuned. Keep following gCaptain for the latest updates on the events transpiring in the Suez. Until next time, thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was great to have Nick Sloane and John Conrad join me to talk about that. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, share it with people, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more updates as they come along. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at MERCOGLIANOS. Thank you again.